Hi there and welcome to our segment on listening skills. As I have mentioned previously in our business communications program, listening is a necessary part of communication, as you well know. And quite frequently, we think that listening is only a skill that requires us to receive something. In other words, we consider it as a receptive skill, meaning that information comes in and we hear it and we listen to information coming in. But actually, that is not the case. Most listening requires a readiness and an eagerness and an active cooperation on the part of the listener. It's not only about hearing things and a one-way reception. There's a lot of work involved in listening if you want to be a great communicator. So we're going to take listening a step at a time and go through the intrinsic parts of listening skills so you can gain a far greater understanding of what listening is all about. And hopefully you will be able to enhance the listening skills that you do have. We can say that ineffective or poor listening is the most frequent cause of misunderstandings. There's a lot of misunderstandings we have in life and at work and with our colleagues, our friends, etc. And if we have poor listening skills, and this is one of the frequent causes of these misunderstandings, we just don't listen well enough. We just don't tune in to the other person. We don't think and listen. We think we do, but we don't. Poor listening causes mistakes. Unhappy customers, if you look at a business sense. It could be in your line of business that purely because you don't have good listening skills, you've got unhappy customers who go somewhere else. Why? Because you didn't listen. You didn't understand what they were trying to say to you. You thought you did, but you didn't listen well enough. Sometimes, if you're in management and you don't listen to your staff, it can cause all sorts of upsets and problems with employees. Low morale can result because you didn't listen well enough. And so on. We could talk about missed sales. We could talk about divorces in private life and conflicts with children. All of the things and most of the mistakes and misunderstandings in life come about because we just don't listen well enough. So listening is an absolute skill that is necessary to the smooth running of life and business in all aspects. So the thing is, in management, and you as a manager and you as an executive have to know the level of your listening ability and whether you need to enhance that listening ability that you have. Are you a good listener? And what is a good listener actually? Does it mean that you hear everything that's going on around you? What does that actually mean? Do we listen well enough? These are the things that I would like you to begin to consider as we go through this program. In previous programs, I've asked you to start looking at yourself. Start looking at all the things about yourself, depending on what our subject is. Now it's time to look at your listening skills. What kind of listener are you? Sometimes we could say that poor listeners actually, if you are a poor listener, you seem disinterested and self-centered. This is true. When you are talking to somebody and you know that they're not listening to you, they are a poor listener. They're not concentrating. Their mind is somewhere else. They don't really want to hear you or know what you're talking about. So they seem quite disinterested. And in some ways they're thinking about themselves rather than thinking about the other person. This is something that is very, very apparent immediately. It doesn't take a university degree for human beings to understand when somebody is not listening to them. So poor listeners quite often appear disinterested and quite often are self-centered, concerned with themselves more than the other person. So let's look a little bit more closely at listening. Listening, as I have said, is a major part of communication. And this is without doubt very, very true. And many of us take this for granted. We think that we don't need to improve this skill, that it's a natural thing we have. But we can improve poor listening, like all the other skills we have talked about in communication so far. You can improve your listening skill. They're important to our professional life, and the skills are important to our personal lives as well. So it's up to you. How good a manager do you want to be? How much better do you want to be in your job? So it is up to you to begin to look at your listening skills. Also, if you improve your listening skills, a thing that goes hand in hand with that is that you enrich your interpersonal relationships. If you are a good listener, people will warm to you. You'll find that people will come to you and want to talk to you. And you will have much deeper conversations. You will have people opening up and wanting to tell you more things. And this will enrich the relationships that you have, either in the workplace or either in your personal life. So, listening is paramount. Good listening is paramount to great communication and building your relationships. A quote from Maya Angelou, a poet, said that the most called upon prerequisite of a friend is an accessible ear. This is very true. In relationships everywhere, most people want to be heard. And that is the most important thing in some ways. People want other people to listen to them and to be accessible. Let them talk and talk and talk and be able to express themselves. This is something that is very deep in our human nature. We want people to hear us. So there is hearing, we say, and listening. Did you know that they are a little bit different? Or did you think they were the same thing? To be able to define the difference between these two is very, very important. These are two skills, and hearing refers to the act of actually perceiving sounds or other stimuli. A bell ringing, we can hear that. That is a sound, a stimulus that we can hear, and we receive it and we react to that. We perceive it. The honking of car horns in the street. When we hear music, that is a sound that we are listening to, and we hear that sound through our ear and through the makeup of our ear and our listening perception, hearing perception. Listening, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It's also the process of perceiving, but perceiving and constructing meaning from the sounds. We're taking it one step further. It's actually analyzing the sound and constructing meaning from it and responding to spoken or nonverbal messages. So listening has a lot of depth to it. We hear things, we hear sounds, we need to also listen to those things and derive meaning from them and respond accordingly. So, we're understanding a little bit more about hearing and listening. What about your skills? Let's take a look here at the time spent in listening. We can see that actually when we are in a face-to-face situation, face-to-face listening, that's where the greater amount of time is spent listening, communicating through listening. When we are face-to-face with people, because we are looking at people, we are needing to listen and analyze and get meaning from what they are saying. This is the most important part of listening, the most important time where we listen very actively and we listen intently. As you can see, next we have mass listening, where we are in groups, where we are in seminars where we are in situations with a lot of people, a lot of things going on around us. But first up, we have to concentrate and listen more when we are face to face, usually one-on-one or small groups. There have been studies conducted recently, in the last, say, 20 years or more, that have revealed that listening is the most significant skill for entry-level positions in universities or in jobs or promotion or joining companies. Listening is an important ability that we have to have. It's most important for promotion to upper management. If you are not able to listen and derive meaning from what is being said and give good feedback, then promotion is not going to come your way. And this is very, very important for you if you are looking to escalate and get promoted in your work. To upper management, a good manager has incredible listening ability. In successful CEOs and upper managers, they have great listening skills. This is something that sets them apart from ordinary CEOs, the fact that they can listen. And listening involves a whole lot more, as you will find out as we go through this program. Listening is very, very critical for you to be able to distinguish between effective and ineffective subordinates. You have to be able to listen to what is going on, to listen very actively and to listen very attentively. And listening is most critical, we could say, for managerial competency. It's one of the important skills that will be listed, one of the important competencies that will be listed and be expected of a strong manager. Of course, it goes without saying that it is necessary for improvement in communication. We all need to improve our listening ability. And it's important for having a great career. You cannot go through and have a competent career in your life unless you have good listening skills. And for any organization, any business, managers with good listening skills will bring organizational success, most importantly here. The thing is, though, we can say this quite openly, is that most people would rather speak than listen. This is true. This is a fact of human nature. And we do tend to want to be dominating the airtime, you could say, with our voice. We do feel that that is the most important part of communication, because that's the way that we are heard. However, as I have emphasized to you, listening is just as important, and in some ways more important than the words that we say. So, one really has to possess, you and I and every manager and every individual who wants to succeed, really must possess the desire to listen and really acknowledge the benefit of listening. Listening can bring you great rewards, and we'll find out more as we go through this program. Here is a graph that looks at our receiving skills, our ability to hear and to listen. And let's take a look at the first segment of this graph. This is the strategic listening process. So first of all, as I did say to you just now, a person needs to commit to the listening process in order to become a better listener. This means that you have to understand the importance of listening and that words are not the only way that you can communicate. Listening is just as important as speaking. And in some instances, it is far more important, as you will find out. So understanding this and committing to that fact is the very first step you can take to improving your receiving skills, your listening ability. Second up, listening between the words is also paramount to improving your skills. Sometimes there are hidden things behind the words. hidden meanings between the sentences. And this is something that you need to be able to pick up on in order to be able to be a great listener. Not just listening to the words that are said, but the meanings, the feelings, the concepts, the innuendos, the deeper parts behind the actual words. Step number 3, to be a great listener. Improving your memory will really help you be a great listener. As you listen, you absorb and you will remember and you will draw on your memory. If you can improve your memory and show the speaker that you have remembered things well, then that enhances the whole listening process. People will admire you and be warm to the fact that you remember things. So when you listen, try to improve your memory of the things you're listening to. Providing supportive feedback is also part of the listening process, as in step number 4 here. Giving feedback, as we have said before in the beginning of our communication program, feedback is the second part of the communication process. So providing supportive feedback to the person who is speaking to you is part of the listening process, part of the communication process. If, in step number 5, as we can see here, if you can be very productive with the time that you have and think things through very, very carefully and very much in detail, then use that time that you're thinking very productively. That will help you with the listening process, because what you have listened to is being implemented and acted upon and being used to impact something. And in step number 6, try to adopt some guidelines for listening. If you want to enhance your listening skills, try to adopt a small set of guidelines that can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that actually assist you in the process, that help you with your particular limitations that you think you might have in the listening process. So, as we go through this program, start to look at your strengths in listening and your limitations in your listening ability, and see how we can begin to enhance and improve your listening skills. Let's take a look now at some simple listening facts, and you may be aware of these or you may not be aware of them. But basically what it means here is that we listen most effectively through, for example, body language. If we look at the center, 55% of our ability to listen comes from watching and acting on body language. Words are there, but we only actually have the greatest impact by watching body language and listening to tone of voice. Communication is very important, and communication non-verbally has the highest impact. And we, in some ways, listen. We are absorbing information through the fact that we watch and perceive what comes out of body language, non-verbal communication. Tone of voice has great impact as well. 38% impact on our ability to absorb information is from the tone of voice that we hear from the speaker. The words are much less important. So what I'm saying here is, when we observe somebody, when we begin to actively listen and interpret their movements and their body language and the sound of their voice, that has the greatest impact on what we absorb and listen and are able to understand, comes through the body language, the non-verbal communication, and the tone of voice of the speaker. The words form a much minor part of that. So let's just have a look here and ask, Are you a good listener? Do you observe what's going on around you? Do you watch body language and nonverbal signs? Do you hear or do you also listen? And how good a listener are you? There are some questions here that can provoke some thought and help you take a look at yourself. And just have a look at whether they apply to you or not. And what kind of response do you give? Let's look at number 1. Do you look at the person who is speaking? When you are talking to somebody or someone is talking to you, do you actually look at them? Do you look at the other side of the room? Do you look at the table? Do you look at them sometimes or all the time or not at all? So this is an important point. When I just mentioned to you about the fact that the greatest impact in communication is what we perceive from body language. 55% impact comes from what we see, the nonverbal cues and signs. So here is the first question. Do you look at the person who is speaking? Second up, do you miss important information because you daydream? So where is your mind when someone is talking to you? Is your mind thinking about lunchtime, or is your mind thinking about the holiday weekend that you've booked for next month? Where is your mind? Are you in tune? Are you sitting actually in that room with that person, or are you daydreaming? So check yourself. First up, do you look at the person who's speaking? Second, do you miss important information because you daydream? Question number 3. Do you sit next to people who distract you? You know, this has a great bearing on whether you can tune in and listen to something. If you're in a seminar or if you're in a meeting and you sit next to someone who's distracting you, if you do that, then do you tend not to listen? That could be a problem for you. So it may be that you need to move away because you are easily distracted and therefore you don't listen to what's going on. Question number 4. Do you distract people around you? Are you fidgeting in some way, or are you moving, or are you creating an interruption or something that causes people to be distracted and therefore there's an interruption in the environment? When someone is speaking to you, do you doodle or draw when they're speaking? Do you get your pen out and you're looking at them but you're actually drawing funny puzzles or drawing circles or fiddling with your pen and writing things on paper? Do you do that when someone is speaking to you? Do you dare to ask questions? Or do you just sit back and listen to everything? Is that the way you listen? Do you ever ask questions? Or do you think that you don't need to? Number 7. If you have a question, do you write it down first and then ask it after the speaker finishes? Is that how you ask questions? Or do you raise your hand and interrupt? And number 8. Do you keep things on your desk that you don't need? Are there things that clutter your desk that just fill up space? Or is your desk quite tidy and neat? Are there things around you on your desk that might distract you? Number 9. Do you try to concentrate on what the speaker is saying and not let your mind wander to other things? Do you really try to focus? Do you intently do that? And number 10. Do you make sure you understand correctly what has been said and repeat back to the speaker what has been said? Are these the kinds of behaviours you have? These behaviours are openers and can help you understand more about whether you are effective in listening or not. So try to get to know yourself a little bit better, as we say all the time through this program. What kind of listener are you? What do you do when someone is speaking to you? What is about you when someone is sharing information with you? Where is your mind? What are you doing? Are you focusing? What is your environment like? Do you say anything back, or do you just think that communication is listening? Before you can be an effective listener, you have to listen to yourself. It's important that you know how to listen to yourself. You need to understand whether you are ready to listen to start with. You need to know whether you want to listen, whether you have that desire and commitment to listen to what is going to be said. So listen to yourself. You have to ensure, first up, that you are ready to listen. When you're ready to listen, then your mental framework is in a totally different sense. It is very, very receptive to what is going to happen. So, assess your mental state. Assess your physical state and your emotional state. As I mentioned before, just in that previous questionnaire, when you are going to be listening to somebody and having perhaps a deep communication or a deep conversation with a member of staff, think about your mental, emotional state and the things around you, the physical state. Are you prepared? This is very, very important. Are you going to be focused, or are you going to daydream and wander off? Remember, you are there to listen. Many, many times, and this is very important in your position as a manager or a supervisor or someone who has to coach staff and talk with staff. Remember, many people will come to you in times of crisis, and they will need to talk through their problems with you. They want to talk through things. They don't want to necessarily get advice on how to solve the problem. They want you to listen intently to what they're saying and what they need to get off their chest and what they need to share with you. So they want to talk things through. So be prepared, and if you aren't sure if the person wants you to just listen or give advice, ask them. Try to find out why it is that person wants to come to you. So if they want to talk through things, then be prepared to just listen. If you feel they want your advice, then ask them, do you want my advice? These are things you need to be very clear on, particularly when you have someone, a member of staff or your subordinate, coming to you and wanting to share deeper thoughts and deeper feelings of problems with you. So remember, you are there to listen, and that's the important thing. When you know that somebody really wants to talk through things, or when you know somebody wants to share some information and needs perhaps support and needs some encouragement, then this is a part of listening that we call giving empathy. Empathy is identifying and understanding how the other person is feeling. And this is an important part or way of listening to people, particularly when they come to you to share their concerns and their problems. Empathic listening, listening in a way that shows understanding, that shows that you have a concern and a genuine interest in that person. You may not actually agree totally with what they're saying, but it means that you are not judging them. You are just being there to help them through this difficult moment and to be understanding of the fact that they have a problem. Empathic listening is a very essential listening skill for managers these days, and one of the most necessary ones to be effective in working with your people. There may be times where you have uncomfortable conversations, and here in this short piece we're talking about deeper conversations where you may feel a little bit uncomfortable. You may find that your beliefs are stop you from being able to listen intently, and your feelings about the subject may mean that you can't listen very well. You might find that the topic is too sensitive. So if that is the case, then perhaps somebody else may need to listen to that person, or if you are the one who's talking about a sensitive situation, you may have to find someone else that can listen to you. So in uncomfortable situations where you feel that you can't give your best, you can't listen fully because it's too sensitive and it's against what you actually prefer to do, then find someone else who can handle that. If you don't, then you are not being very effective, and you won't be listening, and you are wasting the person's time. The person who's come to speak to you is going to go away feeling that you have actually wasted their time. We all have uncomfortable conversations. They crop up from time to time, and you have to know whether you are ready to deal with them. As I said in the slide before this, prepare yourself. Listen to yourself and know whether you are ready to listen to the other person, whether you are able to listen to them. Otherwise, the listening process and the communication process might be a waste of time for the other person, and that's not what you want to have. So a little bit more about communication first, before we go into more about listening. There is verbal communication, as you well understand. The way we say things, what is being said, verbal communication. And then we have a term called paralinguistics. And paralinguistics relates to how the words are said. And this includes the tone of voice, the volume, whether you're loud or soft, and this also includes the speed of the speech, whether it's fast or whether it's quite slow. So paralinguistics is the next step. Once you've said the words, then it's how you say those words that forms part of communication. As we have mentioned briefly in the listening facts, there is also non-verbal communication, and this relates to body language. Body language meaning gestures, the way we use our hands, for example, the way we stand and the way we walk, and the way we move. Non-verbal communication also refers to our face and the facial expressions that we have. It also looks at our eye contact and whether we gaze at somebody or whether we don't actually look at the people we speak to. Non-verbal also comes from any habits we may have, whether we click our fingers or whether we move our head from side to side, or even from the appearance we have with our clothes and the way we wear our makeup or the way we do our hair. All of these things form non-verbal communication. So communication is verbal, it has paralinguistics involved in it, and it is non-verbal. And as we saw before, non-verbal, 55% impact on our communication is from the non-verbal side of things. How we say things is 38%, and 7% impact on communication is from the words that we say. Now, active listening, as we have looked at briefly in this section, is a term used to indicate the skills that demonstrate that you are listening and you are giving appropriate responses, indicating that you have perceived what has been said. As I have just mentioned, there are 3 parts that form the communication process, and the paralinguistic and the non-verbal communication are perhaps the more important features of the communication process. And there is a technique that we use which can help us when we are communicating in a non-verbal fashion. And the acronym SOLAR is useful for a non-verbal demonstration of listening. So we can listen non-verbally. We can listen without acknowledging. We can listen without saying, oh, I see. That's what this means. So these 5 steps of SOLA are useful in demonstrating and practicing non-verbal listening, where we don't say anything to show we're listening. So let's have a look at the SOLA techniques, and we'll break them up into their 5 parts. S, as we can see, stands for square, and this means for effective demonstration of your listening skills, the speaker should face the listener squarely. That means straight on, not to the side, not looking elsewhere, but straight on. Imagine you are looking at them face to face and your body is sort of face to face, square on. If you don't have that position with your body between speaker and listener, then sometimes people might get the feeling that the listener is not interested. So body language here is very important. So first step in showing through your body language, through your non-verbal skills that you are listening, is to sit squarely with the person who is speaking to you. It doesn't mean that you have to have a desk in front of you. It doesn't mean that there needs to be something between you, but just that you can see each other square on. The next part of SOLA is open. And an open body position means that you don't cross your arms or legs. Sometimes these are interpreted as shutting down or being defensive or not letting someone into your space or putting up a barrier. So be open. Try not to cross your arms, as this says. And find a position that is comfortable, where you can sit comfortably and be square on with the person you're talking to. The next part of SOLA is leaning. And if you find that you can slightly lean forward, that shows through body language an eagerness to listen more or learn more, or an eagerness to pay more attention to the speaker. You don't have to lean dramatically forward, but just slightly, so you're not sitting straight up and looking like a piece of board. So we have square on, we have open arms, open position, and leaning slightly forward. The next step in SOLA is eye contact. Now, eye contact, when you are listening, most people can maintain good eye contact, and this encourages speakers to continue. So try to keep a frequent gaze. You don't have to stare at anybody, but eye contact means that you are watching that person and you are taking in what they are saying. If your eye contact is not there, then people will feel you don't want them to continue. They will not talk. You know yourself when someone's talking to you. If they're not looking at you, then you don't feel like they're listening, or they don't want to be involved, or they don't care. So the 4th part of SOLA is the eye contact. Maintain good eye contact or warm eye contact, whatever you like to term it. And the 5th part of SOLA, the SOLA technique, is to be relaxed. A relaxed posture is important, not too relaxed, but relaxed and comfortable, otherwise it will seem that it's artificial. So be relaxed. Perhaps loosen your shoulders a little bit, but don't slouch and disrespect. That shows a bit of disrespect if you slouch. But sit straight with relaxed shoulders, loosened shoulders, and perhaps you can tilt your head to the side a little bit or move delicately in the process. Move slightly with your hands, or keep your hands on your lap, etc. So if you are listening using non-verbal techniques, meaning not saying or ah or yes or I see or asking questions, non-verbal listening using SOLA technique will really help you enhance your communication skills and your listening skills, of course. So this is a very important aspect of non-verbal listening. As I said, non-verbal listening has the highest impact in terms of our listening ability. We receive and we perceive and we understand much, much more through the non-verbal listening ability and also the non-verbal communication of the speaker. Observation is very, very important when we are listening. You have to really fine-tune your skills here. Sometimes somebody might ask you, "Oh, what was that person wearing that you just spoke to?" And you would say, "Oh, gosh, I can't really tell you. I can't tell you what they had on. I didn't watch. I didn't look." We are very lazy in the way that we look at people. And if you want to improve your communication skills and your observation skills and your listening ability, take time to observe. Take time to fine-tune what you do with your observation skills and look at people. Step 1, look at the person's face and their body movements and the way they sit. Take a moment to look at that and absorb it. Step 2, in observing people, try to determine their feelings. Get a feel for their feelings through their body language. It's very simple, and we are very adept as human beings in doing this. When you look at somebody, you can immediately tell whether they're actually happy to be with you or not. You can tell that. You sense it through the way they move and look and stand and the way they speak and the tone of voice, the paralinguistics and the non-verbal body language. We are highly tuned to these things. So step 2, really try to determine someone's feelings through those communication processes. And step 3, of course, take appropriate action. But when you look at somebody, really do begin to try to push yourself to observe things. What colour skirt did she have on? Was she wearing glasses? Was she holding a book? Start to test yourself, because when you do this, you will really begin to improve your communication abilities overall, purely by the fact that you are understanding more about the person. Maybe you can start doing these things by simple exercises every day. When you can have fun with this too, with your subordinates or with your staff. You can play games where you try to improve your observation techniques. When you do this, you are starting to prepare yourself for the communication process. You are fine-tuning your ability to be able to understand the other person. And it's the remembering part also of the process wheel that we talked about earlier. You are beginning to remember more about the person. And later on, when you come back to that person again, you'll find that you are able to know a whole lot more about them. And you're building relationships with them more and more. You get to know each other better when you can see people in very, very detailed aspects through communicating and non-verbal signs and paralinguistic signs, and just by the way they look and what they wear. You may think that's a little bit too deep. However, it is not. Fine-tune your perception ability. And when you do that, you will be fine-tuning your listening ability and your overall communication ability. In communication, silence and body language, as we have just been going through with you, are very, very important. And there's one thing to remember here, because quite often people do get a little bit confused about this. They think that if they don't say anything, that's bad. They feel that if there is silence, that's not a good thing in communication, that you've always got to be talking. Well, I'm here to tell you that silence is not bad. You don't always have to rush in and fill in the gaps in a conversation. These gaps sometimes can be important for the individual to sort of gather their thinking and gather their thoughts to be able to express themselves better. Pauses are necessary. Pauses are a necessary part of communication. Punctuation is important. To pause for a little bit, to give impact to something, that is also important. So silence is not all bad. Don't feel uncomfortable with silence. Quite often it's a good idea to learn to be in a silent atmosphere, to get used to the idea of silence in conversation. Sometimes far greater impact in communication can be gained through the silence. So remember this point. You don't always have to make noise in communication. Silence is an integral part, a very necessary part in the way that we have gaps and pauses, etc., to communicating effectively and to listening. You hear a lot when you listen to silence. True? Yes, it's very, very true. And I'm sure you actually do agree with me. So practice this skill. Listen to yourself, know yourself, and be prepared to be ready for silence. Listen with your eyes. People communicate information through behaviors, as you know, in addition to what they actually say. So the behaviors are very, very important. Your eyes are going to be your ears. Your eyes are your ears as well. So listen through your eyes. This is why eye contact is important as well. You perceive a lot just by the visuals that you see. Pay attention to body language. It will help you understand people's feelings. So silence and body language, the nonverbal communication, the paralinguistics are very integral to good communication and to good listening. So we see the listening process. The listening process can be broken up into 4 areas. Attending, interpreting, responding, and remembering. Remembering is very important too. Attending is the first stage, which involves making the conscious choice to listen, the desire to listen. Prepare yourself and be ready to listen. This is very important. If you don't do this, then the whole communication process may not begin. So attend. Be ready. Choose to listen. Next step. The second stage is interpreting. And this involves giving meaning to the sounds or the stimuli that come and what you hear. Find the meaning of what is going on. Interpret it. Decipher it. And put meaning to it. Next step is responding. The third stage of the listening process is to respond. And this includes your reaction, your response, both verbal and non-verbal feedback. Here we are summarizing the communication process, the communication model in a nutshell. So we have the choice to listen, attending. We have interpreting, that's taking the message and finding meaning in it. Next we have the responding stage of the listening process, which involves you reacting, verbally and non-verbally, giving your feedback. And finally we have the remembering stage, which involves retaining what has been said and the recall of the communication, remembering this for future reference. So now that we've looked at the listening process and the 4 sections, the attending, interpreting, responding and remembering segments of the listening process, let's try to understand a little bit more about active and passive listening. Now you've probably heard the term active listening quite frequently, but what does active listening mean? Does that mean that you get up and jump around the room while you're listening? Is that what it means? Active listeners are listeners who actually focus on the moment. They focus definitely on what is being said and what is going on in the conversation. They are aware of interactions between the speaker and the listener as they unfold. They're quite in tune with things that are going on. They're in tune with the body language. They are in tune with the words and the feelings. And they respond appropriately at the time. They are also aware of distractions that are around them. So an active listener is quite in tune with the whole situation, the conversation and the things that are going on around. Passive listeners, on the other hand, don't really spend much time focusing on the listening process. They're quite away from the whole thing. They don't consider that it's important in some respects, or they are lazy in tuning into the speaker who is there. They expend little or no energy in the listening process at all. So they are very poor listeners. Reasons for poor listening are also very important to know. And as we go through this, start to think of whether you are an active listener. If you are an active listener, however, do you have problems? Do you have things that you want to improve? The best kind of listener to be actually is an active listener, being a manager or an executive in business. But take a look at the reasons for poor listening and see if any of these refer to you. Listening actually does require hard work. You need to concentrate, you need to focus. So if you don't focus, then you are a poor listener. And the reasons why you are a poor listener is you don't want to concentrate. So it's hard work. There's competition too that comes up. Sometimes things take our attention away. The television, the radio, mobile telephones. There's competition to the listener, to the speaker. Competition being other things, other people, noise, other things going on. Sometimes we are poor listeners because we think we know what someone's saying and we interrupt and we don't listen fully. So we rush to action. And that means that we listen poorly. We don't listen to what was going to be said. We thought we knew it all. So we rush into action. Are you a rusher? Do you jump in and interrupt people? If you do, then you are a poor listener. Sometimes there is the point of speed in speech. And we have speech speed and thought speed. The average person speaks at about 135 to 175 words a minute. But they can listen to 400 to 500 words a minute. And therefore, the gap time spent jumping into conclusions or daydreaming, etc., is there. So we have a difference in the speed with which we speak and the speed with which we listen. We can listen very quickly and therefore we think we can jump in. Sometimes a lack of training causes us to be a poor listener. We do more listening than speaking, reading or writing, but we receive no formal education for good listening. So we haven't really trained ourselves to listen. We've learned how to write, we've learned how to read, we've learned how to speak through our education, but we don't really go to school to learn how to listen, do we? So we have not been trained to listen, and this means we have poor listening skills. And this is why we need to really enhance our skills. Most workers, most employees spend 3/4 of each working day talking. Nearly half of it is spent on listening. So we find that we spend a lot of time talking, but we don't spend as much time listening. A typical employer's listening effectiveness is only 25%, and 3/4 of everything that we hear sometimes is distorted or quickly forgotten. If we are untrained, if we don't have good listening skills, we're likely, as I said, to only understand about 50% of a conversation. Therefore, after 48 hours, we find that this 50% also drops to about 25%. So that means that we actually forget a lot. And remember, in the wheel of the listening strategies, that improving your memory and remembering, and part of the listening process, the fourth part, is remembering. So we really have to improve the way that we listen so that we can remember much more. So as you can see, there are problems we have as people, as human beings, in how we retain content and how we listen. So these statistics show us that we do indeed need to enhance our listening skills. So what are the benefits? If we have better listening skills, what benefits are we going to get? Well, we're going to have improved relationships for one. It improves our trust. And we also are more willing to cooperate. If you are a better listener, you'll find that your staff will improve their relationships with you. That is a definite. There will be fewer misunderstandings, fewer errors, which mean that lower costs in errors as well. So better products, better services, higher profits. Better understanding all round, and this will improve teamwork, the transfer of information in your organization, and also you'll build morale and you'll lead to higher productivity. People will have greater job satisfaction as well. It's a good thing to be a good listener. There are rewards everywhere, as I say. So this is important to understand, that if you can improve upon your listening skills, the benefits are there. Improved relationships, fewer misunderstandings, better understanding and better teamwork, and greater job satisfaction for you and for your staff. Thank you for taking the time to go through this segment with me. Listening, as I have said, is a very important part of the communication process. And we have limitations as human beings, and we have the ability as human beings to increase our listening abilities. So what kind of listener are you? When we went through the questions earlier on in this particular segment, how did you answer them? Do you understand yourself now? Do you know more about your particular listening ability? Do you know whether you daydream? What kind of person are you when someone comes to talk to you about a problem? What poor listening skills do you have? In a moment, we're going to go through the next segment, and we're going to look at ways of improving listening skills and a little bit more about the different levels of our listening ability. Thank you very much for your time.